Thanks, Mushon and Heather. I just have a few points I'd like to reiterate, and then we'll move on to questions. So the first point I was thinking about is in relation to tactics and thinking about obfuscation in relation to invisibility. I guess also a lot of what I'm going to pose is more questions that you can take up or not. So I would love to hear more from you about the overlaps between the way you're using idea of invisible. I mean, obviously because it partially evokes obfuscation, but maybe where you see the bifurcations or convergences between invisibility and obfuscation. And maybe also within that cluster of thinking about tactics, I think it's interesting to think methodologically about how part of both the projects are about education and about developing tools. And then that would lead to the second point, which is about the mode of working. So thinking about imagination versus maybe practicality, where in in Mushon's project, there's public software that's being developed in a very practical way that's being distributed publicly, where there's a lot of aspects of your work that are very much about imagining possible or pending futures of surveillance, in order to both articulate what futures of control could look like, as well as what are the options for resistance within that. So thinking about the what each of those methodologies, or whether you're going the more imaginary speculative pathway or the practical one, what are the limits and what are the benefits of those? And then the last point would be about politics, and I think it would be great to hear both of you say a little bit more about maybe the larger political frames you kind of see these projects fitting within, right? I think maybe more with Mushon, there was some evocation of collectivity and collective action, but I'm wondering, what's the relationship in the work between, a politics that's more centered around collectivity or a politics more centered around, individuality? And I guess with Heather's work, the last bit that you were showing, you are working with a group of people, so there's also an element of collectivity there at the level of producing the work and the knowledge. And also thinking about, is it a politics of transformation, or is it about a politics of preservation, Is it politics of political transformation or individual presentation? Is the end goal privacy? Is privacy kind of the best way to go in terms of politics? What are the limits of privacy, in relation to, and thinking about it in terms of, at the level of legislation, but also maybe in a more radical utopic way. And yeah, those were my kind of points. And I think if you could, maybe respond briefly to whatever you want, and then we could take the questions from Mark and Christian. So maybe just like a short response from each of you on any of that.
You want to start with Sean?
You want me to start?
Sure, go for it.
I think the question of the invisibility is interesting. Because we imagine invisibility as something as not seeing, rather than the attempt that we're making, and I think Heather is making as well, in the case of obfuscation, in which it's not about not seeing; it's about seeing but not analyzing correctly, or failing to analyze, or the injecting ambiguity. So it's not the lack that is the lack of vision, but the blurring and multiplication of signals that we can talk about vision in that sense as something that is not only the technical idea of like light coming to the eye, or information and data making it to the brain, or to the thinking machine. So I think there we can kind of extend our idea of invisibility. As far as privacy is a word that I have a lot of problems with. I think most people, including myself, don't really know what it means. or can't really draft the boundaries of privacy, especially when the kind of debates that we have today are really blurring, in some cases, and actually 4 years ago I talked about this in transmediale, that it has become this war between the private and the public. If you're private, you're selfish. You're like it's like you're not sharing your data. You're not sharing your creative process. The whole sharing culture is about pushing privacy aside, or pushing the private aside. And during the talk 4 years ago, I was proposing Dana Boyd's term, invisible audiences, and trying to think how, what about the invisible audiences? Well, and that kind of connects to Helen Nissenbaum's idea of context, privacy in context. It's a matter of creating context. It's a matter of being able to express yourself, or in the phase that we have today, especially through Heather's work, to be in a context that allows you flexibility, allows you to, when my students add me on Facebook, I tell them, the reason that I'm not going to approve your friendship is because I don't want to see you having fun on Friday and then coming to class unready and having to, I don't want to be in this position of having this information that would challenge your excuses. I want you to have the freedom to lie to me in that sense. And yeah, so yeah, I'll stop here.
I think maybe the thing that jumped out to me the most from that was this thinking about the speculative and the real. And this is something that comes up a lot in these conversations. And it's interesting because at first I was really resistant to thinking of my work as speculative, because one of the things, I actually really approach every project that I work on as a kind of research question. So these aren't, to me, they aren't design fictions. They're things that I actually spend years researching and working in the lab and making sure that sort of to the best of my abilities and to sort of resolve my own questions, sort of making sure that these are things that are actually possible. So with Stranger Visions, I realized that, I sort of went into it with this question of how much can I actually learn about someone? And of course, what is knowledge, or what do you know, or what is a fact about a person is a complicated thing. But I think in terms of the speculative and the real, one of the things that I didn't include in this presentation were sort of all of the services that are available today, right now, for police to do exactly what I did. And one of these services almost, it just came out actually this year, and it almost looks exactly like my project. It's literally like, we will generate a 3D portrait of your suspect. But when I worked on the project, I was drawing on already published research. So this is stuff that's already happening. It's sort of on the cusp of becoming widespread. And so I think, at the same time, there is a speculative dimension. So for example, when I create these portraits, I'll generate maybe 5 different versions of the same face, and then I'll choose the one that I think is the most aesthetically interesting to actually present. So there definitely is the speculative dimension, and it is pushing it sort of one step beyond what's currently widespread at the moment. But one of the things I think is so interesting is this sort of, where do we decide that something is real? Is it real? Is it not real because I'm an artist and I did it? Is it more real because the police do it? Does a corporation have to offer it for sale for it to become real? Is it about like a selling of reality? So it's kind of, I guess that's sort of...
Do you mean real or dangerous?
Well, just that there is always this kind of dichotomy that gets posed, often to me at least, when talking about my work, about whether it's speculative or whether it's real, or whether it's a hoax, right? Is it like a media hoax? That kind of thing. And in a way, it could have been. And for the purposes of the project, that's something else that I learned sort of going through it is, although for myself, in my personal interests, I want to know, is this possible? For the purposes actually of the piece, it doesn't really matter. It could be real, it could be a hoax. So it's sort of, that's more about my sort of subjective experience as an artist of making the work.
Okay, well, we're now going to take 2 comments from some targeted audience members, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So we're going to hear from Mark Shepard, who is an artist and architect based in the US, but I think he's living in Berlin currently. And then after that, we'll hear from Christian Homburg, who's an anti-corruption activist based here in Germany. So maybe we'll start with Mark and then Christian.
Okay, thanks. So first, thank you for these pretty fantastic presentations. Really very much enjoyed them. I actually have, let's give a round of applause, right? I actually have one question for each of you, if that's fair game. And so I'll just very quickly ask them at once, and maybe you can respond separately. But Mushon, I think I'm very, very interested in the kind of strategies you're deployed with ad nauseum. And one of the areas that really interests me is the questions that arise in terms of the monetization of the click. And so I think about Alessandro and Paolo's project, Google Will Eat Itself, and the kind of monetary system that they developed around this kind of click farm. And I wonder how ad nauseum addresses the kind of underlying financial system that you're intervening within. And then with Heather, it's really wonderful to see where this work has developed. I mean, I remember, you beginning it at IBEAM a number of years ago. And, I think also, in this context about this question about veracity. I mean, you were talking about the sort of reality of something and the sort of plausibility of something. 4 years ago, Paul Van Aus was showing his work, Latent Figure Protocol, here at Transmediale. And one of the things that project was addressing was just this notion that, the belief in the veracity, the scientific authority of the DNA fingerprint was, in fact, a cultural construct, right? And one can sort of think about the work that John Law and Bruno Latour have done in terms of inscription devices, in terms of scientific practices. So how do you position what you're doing in relationship to the kind of cultural discourse around the veracity of DNA fingerprinting and what it can, and maybe more importantly, cannot tell about us?
You go first.
Okay. So that's a really great question. I think, so another sort of area that I didn't really talk about in this work is that I see it as sort of exploring loopholes, and in some cases almost as being a kind of exploit. So with Invisible, I do see that project as pointing to a vulnerability in our legal system. I mean, so the first question that almost always comes up when I talk about Invisible is, well, won't that help criminals? So I can sort of, I can answer that now so no one has to ask that question. And it joins with your question, I think. Because the answer is, well, if it helps criminals, what does that say about the authority that we place in DNA evidence? Because the research that I'm drawing on to make this project, is widely accessible, published research, stuff that's been talked about in the newspapers, things that get brought up even in popular culture, episodes of Law and Order, the show Dexter. And so it's sort of like widely available, popular information. And so I think one of the things that the work is trying to do is to sort of use the form of one thing to call attention to something else. So it is a kind of double gesture. And with Stranger Visions as well, it's sort of, yes, it's about biological surveillance, but it's also hopefully asking, well, how do you then question these modes of technological production? So I'm hoping that there's sort of two simultaneous things that go on. So specifically with Invisible, that it is both calling attention to biological surveillance, sort of on the surface, but then it's also sort of planting these seeds of doubt in the cultural authority of DNA in sort of the, yes, exactly, the amount of trust that we put in it.
I'll address your question or through giving you some more context of the connection between advertising networks and the politics and economics of the web. Basically, there are arguments that say that one of the reasons that Google developed Chrome it was to be in a position of leverage towards Adblock Plus. So Adblock Plus is the most popular, was the most popular extension on Firefox, is still the most popular extension on Firefox, and has become the most popular extension on Google Chrome. But what most of you probably don't know is that Adblock Plus is getting money from Google to actually differentiate between what they call inobtrusive ads. And inobtrusive ads are also known as text ads, also known as Google ads or Google AdSense. And there is a checkbox, and if I'm not mistaken, it's turned on by default in Adblock Plus, and it allows inobtrusive ads. So they don't; these are not These are not banners, and therefore they don't show themselves the same way. They are just text ads, which present themselves as more informative and maybe less manipulative, at least visually, but much more manipulative data-wise. And we were actually invited to join this manifesto against obtrusive ads after we launched Ad Nauseam. And we were discussing this between the three of us, and I was saying, no, it's not about how they look, it's about what they do. And as far as we're concerned, when we launched, one of the first requests was don't only support Adblock Plus, support Adblock Edge, for example, which is a fork of Adblock Plus that doesn't have this distinction. And this is one of the upgrades that we've just added to Ad Nauseam. So you can use multiple ad blockers to do that. And yeah, I talked about the affordability, this term of the way the web turns attention into money. The same happens in the back. As I mentioned, I'm working with data. I'm working on analyzing data as well. So I know the experience of trying to make sense of noise. It's a huge headache. And if it can become an even bigger headache, then it becomes less profitable to do it. At some point, if there's enough noise, it wouldn't be worthwhile to do it, at least in some cases. And then we can have leverage again. So we are playing not only a symbolic game, but definitely an economic game.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you both for your presentation, which I found very inspiring. My question for the first presentation would be, I think you mentioned that you also want to fight back with Ad Nauseam. And I believe this kind of fight is only possible if there's some form of collective experience or the experience of an individual that it has some impact with what the person is doing, either or, either you party or you see things are changing. What would be your vision of Ad Nauseam? What could be the impact or the collective experience? That would be the first question. And the question about the bi-anonymous activities is like, I was just thinking, how would a life look like if you really try to live bi-anonymously? I mean, it would probably mean that I always have to travel with my mobile toilet whenever I leave further away from my house, and I don't want to go into details. So do you think that, and I found it already, after I installed PGP, it was okay, but is this really a realistic option that we live by anonymously? And if not, what does that mean on the policy level?
Okay, so I'll go first now. Balancing it. So yeah, we have some ideas about making it more visible, the solidarity part. Like the reason that I like the I am Spartacus part so much is that it's about solidarity. And we want, this is where we want to go. It's not about, because I've been using anti-blocking plugins for a long time. I actually turned them off so I can generate more data. So it is about performing to the data trackers and performing as a collective. Some of the a part of the problem of big data in general is that it's in the cloud, and as you could see in the exhibition, Timo Arnell's amazing work is showing the cloud, how physical it is, how like the cloud is a place. It's a place with no humans, or not a place for humans, and that's a part of the problem. But we're trying to think about ideas about exchanging ads between different users, and kind of even further playing with what does it mean to, so it wouldn't only be my image, it would be somebody else's image. It's things that we're developing. We're also developing a Chrome extension. It's underway. That's our next big thing. They might be seeing this, but I really secretly hope that Google blocks it when we get to the Chrome store. But I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, so really good question. Is it even possible, right, to live by anonymously? And I would say that right now, I don't think we know the answer to that question, because there is literally so little research in this. I mean, you can count the number of papers on the subject with 2 hands. So you can actually read all of the literature, in a week, basically. So I don't think we know. But even, so there is, of course, thinking about policy. And so I've been pretty involved with the policy end of it. But I also see policy in this area as being sort of inherently limited, right? Because there's almost nothing that you could do to stop someone who is determined enough from enacting these kind of biological protocols in their kitchen, much as I just gave you the instructions how to do, right? So it's almost impossible, I think, to stop it legally. And there are also these questions that come up about privilege as well, right? As I think always comes up with privacy. Who has to worry and who doesn't have to worry? So there are kind of different new categories that would emerge, I would imagine, in this kind of future that's around the corner. Then, of course, there's an educational component. So looking at, for example, sort of like what Mark was saying, what does DNA, for example, what does DNA actually say? What are the limits of what it says? What is genetically determined? What are the limits of this kind of genetic determinism? The thing is, I see that as sort of rapidly expanding. So I think we have a pretty widespread cultural understanding now that our genes are not completely deterministic. But I see a kind of new genetic determinism emerging in the realm of looking at the microbiome, for example. So now it's almost as if now we're looking at the DNA of the microbes and sort of imagining ourselves as genetically determined by the microbes in place of now just our own DNA. So it's like a complex of DNAs. So these are sort of some of the things that I'm thinking about. But I think the main thing actually really is cultural, and it's going to be up to us. So in particular, it's up to everyone in this room. We have to shape the cultural norms around this. They don't exist yet. I mean, the only norms that are sort of already starting to shape here are around paternity testing. And at least in the United States, it's really popular on TV to bring someone in and bring in the kid and then have the reveal, right? Like, is it your kid? And these kind of services that make it available to send exactly this, send in 3 cigarette butts from dad and see if he's really dad, that is really growing in accessibility. And as you saw, the price is very low. So I really think that while we can sort of think about policy and education, it's really up to us, and we all have a responsibility in that matter.
I want to add something, 'cause,
Yeah, please.
something through the things that you said. I think it's, at least the way I see ad nauseum, it's also about hope and excitement, and to get back to these things. Because there's nothing exciting about, I've been to crypto parties. They're nice. But celebrating the fact that you're hiding is not as exciting as celebrating the fact that you're going exploding all over the place. And that's something we want to do, and we're kind of conditioned to do that. We're conditioned by this sharing, social networking, user-generated content. Give us more, give us more, give us more. Okay, we will give you more. We'll give you a lot more, a lot more. And that's playful, and that's performative, and that's exciting. The web, the internet has become it has become kind of depressing, especially after Snowden. And I think Snowden is a step towards something that you need to go to understand actually what's going on, and then kind of jump again and do something and explode and celebrate this. Rather than hide and be depressed, or just say, okay, I have nothing to hide, blah, blah, blah. So I think we should be hopeful. And I think, ad nauseum and Track Me Not and Invisible, and these examples, I see connections with the way artists use over-identification. So identifying with a target and kind of extending their identity or their message to the level that kind of breaks their identity completely. So over-identifying with the call for more data. Let's see how big data can be, okay?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, actually, and I'm also really an optimist in this, and I would just say that I think this is a real opportunity for all of us. So it's not necessarily something to be scared of, or to feel like now I have to, run around in a latex suit or a bubble. But it's really an opportunity here to get involved and think through this stuff and be on the forefront of something new.
Okay, let's open it up to questions. If you, just raise your hand and wait until a microphone comes to you. Okay, Tatiana.
Because I think that finally we see a bit of hope here, and I also agree with you that while we are criticizing data, at the same time we have also to find what are the right tools to become proactive. And so I think from one side I would like to say to Mushon that I think maybe we should all become Spartacus, and I think in that sense it would be a really interesting counterpart of only speaking about cryptography and surveillance. But at the same time also I have a question for Heather, because for sure there are some implications that we should consider. Because recently I was hearing some biohackers saying that they have been progressively invited at some FBI conventions. So you can really understand why the FBI could be deeply interested in the also research that are similar to what you do. In fact, I wanted to ask you, I don't find your research speculative. I think it's pretty real, because, for example, if we could imagine that maybe you will create an exhibition with the data that you collect, and so you will also expose this facial sculpture that you are creating, then turn out that one of these faces is actually really close and pretty similar to a face of a criminal that just did something and the police is looking for this person. And then maybe the police would come to you and ask, can you give me your data? Then what are you going to do, would you oppose to this thing? And I think it's pretty important to make this kind of consideration because I would say what we are facing right now also with the surveillance system is pretty close to many of the speculation that we could do. So I would say what you are doing is not absolutely something that is not real, you know, it's pretty
absolutely.
real.
It is real, and I have been approached by various portions of law enforcement, and so I have had to sort of draw my own lines around what I would be interested in doing and what I wouldn't be interested in doing. So I mean, to get into maybe a little bit more, you know, the details of that practice is called forensic phenotyping, the practice of attempting to create a picture from DNA of what someone looks like. And so I do think that there are potential opportunities for that technology that aren't necessarily problematic. So for example, unidentified remains, where you have only a little bit of a person who's a victim of a crime, attempting to give some kind of image to what that person might look like. That's actually an effort that I went into with a police department, and we weren't able to actually get far enough along to create the portrait due to the DNA just being too degraded. But that was one instance in which I was willing to actually consider a collaboration with the police. On the other hand, the Moscow police contacted me and asked me if I would help create a portrait of a rapist. And I decided that I wouldn't, because I don't think that the technology is nearly accurate enough to subject someone who could potentially look like that portrait to what they might be subjected to as a suspect, especially considering that once you're a suspect, your DNA would be collected and then would end up in that database. So those are actually very real lines that I've had to kind of draw for myself.
I want to add something. So it has to do with the plausible deniability that I mentioned. So plausible deniability is culturally becoming less and less plausible. And that's what I mean by reambiguation. Like, I don't want to live in a world that is undeniable or disambiguated. I have nothing to do there. It's not for me. It's for machines. Some people are super excited about that. I'm super unexcited about that. And I want to live in a place that allows me plausible deniability and flexibility and play. That is something that we should demand. And you know, I'm happy when I'm seeing the success of services that come and go but still succeed, like chat roulette and then Snapchat and even the fact that, you know, the search in Facebook is really crappy. You know why? Because we don't want it to be good. We don't want it to be good. As soon as if the search of Facebook would have worked like Google, we would have all closed our accounts. And they are using it, you know, obviously they're mining it to a much wider, in a much wider scope than we can see. But at the same time, it's not only about them watching us, the government, the corporations, it's about us watching each other as well. And the fact that we are constantly in this panopticon 2.0, it's something that we should express our unease with, and we should fight against it as not only as a demand from governments and corporations, but as a demand from each other.
Now it's on. Okay. Thank you very much for a fantastic presentation, both of you. And I would like to ask Mushon specifically about, not specifically, but kind of go back to the ethical implications of making nonsense. It seems to me that the whole concept of obfuscation makes sense to the ones that are aware of the fact that it doesn't make sense, basically. It's not supposed to make sense. So what I'm thinking about is, one of the criticisms that big data receives today is that basically it's such a vast pool of information that you can argue for whatever you want to argue for. And I'm just thinking about, like, you know, the more you contribute to it, you actually create more data for arguments that can have, you know, very concrete results in not necessarily only the digital sphere, but also in the kind of, let's say, more material realm around you. And do you have any reflections on that? That, you know, like playing that game can have certain harmful implications, you know, somewhere where you are not, you know, necessarily operating in, or in other contexts. I'm also thinking about this kind of failed data mining experiment by Google related to the, you know, spread of the flu, I think, in 2007. So, I mean, what I'm trying to pinpoint is that, you know, in whatever nonsense, if you want, you can find some kind of a truth, you know, and you can solidify it into a truth that has material implications later on. I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I think when we're working, I'm volunteering with a public knowledge workshop in Israel, which is a government transparency and civic engagement NGO. And obviously there's a lot of work to do there. And I constantly say to my colleagues, we have to remember that we have a bias towards what we can quantify. And that's a bias that skews our image of the data that we're looking at. So I can see this becoming, you know, what we've both shown here are really, really early attempts to make big data a conversation or a political battle or even debate, because there's something so passive about big data. If you're excited about big data, it's because you want to take advantage of it, not because you're excited about being a subject to that level, unless you're trying to become something that can be mounted on a USB. As some people in the singularity movement want to be, but this bias towards what we can quantify is something that we might be able to play with. So let's play with our bias. Let's poke holes in the cloud, and in this myth of big data, because everybody in this room who has ever tried to analyze data knows how hard it is. And how messy it is, and how far we are from what the myth promises. So let's celebrate it. That's what I'm trying to say. So and if we break the myth of big data, then we can get back our plausible deniability. We can get back the kind of flexibility that we're looking for. I hope that answers, or yeah.
We'll take one more question.
Over here? Yeah.
Go for it.
No, microphone?
Okay, I could just ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice talks to both of you. I really enjoyed them. I have specific questions about, so do not track. I feel like we're at this point where the products in the space of user-generated content, and here are these actions, like I like something on Facebook. What does do not track mean for that? Or like, you know, you're liking videos on YouTube. We're building big data products of like collaborative filtering and recommendation engines that don't really, like, the ad world isn't separated from the product world. And so these products, like, tracking is not a separate thing from the products themselves. And I'm wondering, like, I just feel like we're not really asking, like this is the discussion that people are having. I'm seeing ad blockers, I'm seeing ad nauseum, and I think these are great things for us to do and to push, but I feel like there's a way that we need to be engaging with this, like, outside of that, that's more just like, what are the products that we want to exist? What are the smart products that we want to exist? How, and what are the lines that they draw that we think are, like, ethically good?
That's a really good point, because a lot of the targeted advertising in social media specifically is about data that you knowingly have created, and when you're liking things, then this is something you're knowingly attaching your identity with. It's a tough question. At the same time, I do see tiers that we can address. So, for example, I do use plugins that make sure that Facebook doesn't know about every page that I visit, or Google doesn't know about every page that I visit, until I find a way to either include, oh, that's a nice idea, include a like button on every site, okay? And include my like button on every site. There's the passive information that we create. That would be the first step, because Google, out of the 100 most popular websites on the internet, 97 are reporting back to Google about everything that we're doing. Okay? Reporting back passively through Google Analytics, through YouTube embeds, through font embeds. You know, it's endless. I would start there. And then, you know, because the promise of targeted advertising, it doesn't really work. Like, it's not like I'm seeing ads that I like to click unless I've searched for them, and then they're not targeted advertising, they're contextual advertising, I've searched for something, I'm looking for something, I get more search results. That happened before the revolution when data has become the new oil, right? It's not like they're really promising us something that is more valuable to us. I do agree that Facebook, the way the ads on Facebook work, is based on much more data that we are knowingly creating. The way that you know, one reporter tried to hide the fact she was pregnant from the internet. You probably heard about that in many different panels and events here. It's not like I'm presenting before you a plan for us to get out of here, of that place that we're or that trajectory that we're on. But and I hope people in this room would use this as an opportunity to extend the kind of notion that it's not over. Techno-determinism is bullshit, right? Because there's a lot of forces behind techno-determinism, whether it's celebratory or completely depressive. It's bullshit. We have things to do. I don't know what all of them are, but and I'm sure not all of us know what they are, but we are going to explore them, and we are going to steer this ship towards where we want to be. Yes.
Okay, thanks everyone so much.